Hey, this is Cam with Blacktail Studio, and this is my how to make a river table YouTube build. Just finished this black walnut with black epoxy. Used Epoxy, got the walnut from GOBY Walnut. I'm going to get into all those details and a lot more. Everything you need to build this table in your garage. This one, as you can see, is a little bit of an unusual design, but I think that'll help for the instructional purposes because really you build a form, cut your wood, drop it in, pour some epoxy. A little bit more to it than that, but I'm going to get into all the details. If I left anything out, ask me in the comments because I have another larger 8-foot black walnut dining table river build coming up that I'm really excited to get started. So let me know what you think, and hopefully this is helpful. Thanks.
I used to buy my slabs all over the place on Craigslist, at random suppliers, and now I find myself it's actually not even that much more expensive just to go to a place where I know it's been dried properly. I know there aren't bugs in it. GOBY Walnut's 20 minutes from my house, but they ship internationally. They've been really, really good to me. They'll send me pictures of inventory they have. They'll hold stuff for me. So I pretty much always just go to GOBY Walnut now. One of my followers on Instagram saw this slab at GOBY and called it the fish slab, and I thought that was pretty fitting. The very first thing I do when I make one of these river tables is I make a template. It's even before I pick out the slab, I'll generally go make one of these templates out of just simple 1x2s or whatever I have laying around. Don't waste a lot of time making these, just down and dirty, a couple brad nails. Just make sure you get the size fairly close, doesn't even have to be exact. It's just to give you an idea to visualize. And then when you go to select your layout, really take your time here. Try every layout. Don't go in with your original biases. This was kind of my original layout I had in mind and ended up finding another layout I liked a lot more, and luckily the client agreed. Kind of surprised myself when I brought this around like this because this is the layout I ended up choosing and I really, really liked it, but not at all the original design that I had in mind. But even though I liked the way this looked right now, I wanted to keep going, test out every other possible layout, make sure there wasn't going to be something I liked a little bit more. So the nice thing about these templates is it makes it pretty easy to see if there's a design you like because it really frames it nicely, shows you what it's going to look like. None of these ones ended up working, so as I looked at it, I ended up coming around to that design right there. That'll do. Next thing I do is I mark just with a pencil the outline of this layout so I can make my cuts. I like to make it a little bit oversized, at least an inch, if not maybe 2 inches. That way when I cut it down, I can guarantee I get the size I set out to get. The next thing I do is prepare the slab to make all my cuts. As you can see here, this slab wasn't very light. It started out at 2.5 inches thick, which is a little thicker than most of the slabs I start out with. I'm fortunate enough to have a Festival track saw. It makes this really, really easy. I have built a number of river tables with just a regular old circular saw, so don't think you have to have a tool like this. But having it does make things quite a bit easier. You see I'm making some multiple passes there to prevent some binding that can happen when you try to make one big deep pass. Now that I have the main section of my river cut to size, I can set my template back down and find out how I want to orientate the second part to this river. This slab didn't have as many options as I did for the main river, so it was pretty clear which way I wanted to do it, but I still wanted to test out all the possible layouts. It's always a good idea to have one really flat side, so when you put it in your mold, it sits down flat, doesn't twist on you. And how I'm doing that is with it's called a router sled. It's a really simple jig that you can make. This one cost me maybe $10 or $15. There's lots of YouTube videos, lots of places online you can search to make one of these yourself. Really recommend it because most of these slabs aren't going to be able to fit in a planer that you have access to. So this is an inexpensive way to get one side completely flat. After that, I like to clean these up with a wire wheel. Sanders tend to kind of remove the contours from the live edge slab, and these wire wheels leave the contours but clean all the debris off. This is one step I see a lot of people on Instagram and YouTube skipping, and I would never skip this step, so I recommend you don't either. What I'm doing is I'm sealing the edges with epoxy. I do 2 coats of just regular quick drying epoxy on these edges. And the reason I do this is when you pour the epoxy, it will prevent any of the bubbles from forming. That's where they want to form, is right near the wood. So if you seal it, you won't get any of the little bubbles. Now that you're ready to start building the form, I like to use melamine, which is this white sheet material you'll see. Epoxy doesn't really like to stick to it very much. It also stays really, really flat. So I like this over using something like a plywood. Definitely wouldn't use an OSB. When you're building the sides, make sure they are at least 1 inch taller than the total thickness of your table, so you don't have to worry about it overflowing. And this is called Tyvek tape. It's a house wrap. You see a lot of guys using the red stuff. That's called tuck tape. The only difference is that stuff is sold in Canada. This stuff's sold in the US. Same type of stuff, either one will work. And this will prevent the epoxy from sticking to the mold, which can be a nightmare if it happens to you. I urge you not to skip this step. This is from a lot of experience, or I should say bad experiences. It doesn't take very much to get a leak going in this epoxy. It's pretty thin, so I go kind of overboard on sealing this. I try to make it just as tight as an aquarium. Put a little pressure with the brad nail. Make sure you get a good watertight seal, because these epoxy leaks are killer. And anybody who's made any of these tables has had these leaks and knows how painful they'll be to see $1,000 worth of epoxy running on your floor. Here I am adding some caulk. Silicone would have probably been a little bit better, but both of them will work just fine. And this is maybe a little bit overkill, but I've had leaks before and I refuse to ever have one again. This is another step I see a lot of people on Instagram and YouTube skipping, but another step that I would never skip. What I'm doing is I'm sealing it with shellac. This is a de-waxed shellac. Either one will work for this purpose though, the de-wax or the original. And why I'm doing this is to prevent any of the dyed epoxy from staining the wood. Just a couple drips can really penetrate this wood, especially if you're doing a lighter wood. The walnut's not as bad as showing. But if you do get some drips accidentally, and you will get some drips accidentally on your slab, it can penetrate 1/4 or even a 1/2 inch down, and you'll never sand it out and can actually ruin a project. Don't forget the sides and the end grain. I forgot those before, and especially the end grain will really soak up that color. So pay special attention to the end grains and the sides. Now you want to just scuff up this epoxy to give a good bond. Anytime you're pouring epoxy over epoxy, you want to give a good scuff with 320 sandpaper. Make sure it has something to adhere to. This is probably the most common question I get when people ask me about making their own river tables, because epoxy is so expensive and they don't want to waste any. So what I do is I take a measurement every 4 inches, and then I take the average of all those measurements. And I do this for the top and the bottom if I have a slab that is sloped like this. So here's the bottom. And there's my average width across the bottom. There's my average width across the top. And I just add those together, divide, find the overall average width. Now that I have my average width, I just take the length. And with that length, I'm going to go find a rectangle volume calculator. There's lots of those online. And you'll see a screenshot of the one I found. And this is the volume needed for the main river, 2 inches by 36 by whatever my average width was. And I do the volume in liters. I had to Google how to find the volume of a triangle, but that's the volume for that triangle section. So this will be my total volume in liters needed for this entire epoxy pour. Not too bad. Now that you have your volume figured out, you're going to get everything nice and clean. You don't want this chalk getting mixed in with your resin. Also don't want any of the dust. I'm using a tack cloth. The microfiber works really good for cleaning off all the little dust particles from where we sanded those epoxy edges. Just make sure it's nice and clean. Air hose is good to blow everything off with too. All right, suit up for part 2, which will do the epoxy pour, the finishing, table base mounting, even the photography method I use when these tables are done. Thanks, and as always, please subscribe.